Okay, so what does that mean for Ontario's construction industry? We heard a lot of information, received a lot of information from Derek. So how do we kind of drill that down, and what impact does it have for our industry, and where is our industry heading here in Ontario? Katherine Jacobs will be our next presenter, and she's been the Director of Research and Operations at the Ontario Construction Secretariat for the last 10 years. I think it's fair to describe Katherine as a respected and thoughtful contributor to improving our collective understanding of Ontario's construction industry. As Director of Research and Analysis, Katherine provides a wealth of knowledge and insight on key trends affecting Ontario's construction industry. Key areas of research, some of these I touched on earlier: competitiveness, the underground economy, fair wage policies, labor market conditions, demographics, apprenticeship, and safety. Katherine holds a Master's of Environmental Studies from York University and an undergraduate degree in economics from Queen's University. Please join me in welcoming Katherine Jacobs to the podium.
Great, thank you, Sean. Appreciate that introduction. It was great to hear Derek, and also really good to sit there and watch his presentation and see that it's not too far off from what I'm saying. That always makes you a little nervous when they start talking about their outlook in construction and whether it's going to deviate from what I have to say. But fortunately, we're on the same tone this year. As you can see, the title of my presentation, Optimism Reigns. And I thought I would start out by looking at that word optimism. So I've put up a quick definition here: hopefulness and confidence about the future. And it's really the confidence about the future is really what I saw when I was looking at the contractors' survey this year. They're quietly confident. I won't say they're, as Derek was saying, it's not gangbusters confidence, but they're quietly confident about what the future holds for them when we look forward to 2014. Before we dive too far into the outlook and to see what the contractors actually said, just wanted to take a few minutes to go and look back historically where we have been. Derek also talked about, we've had a pretty good run over the last 10 to 12 years. Here a graph looking at total ICI construction for Ontario in constant dollars, so that's removing any inflation numbers from that. An average annual investment of about $15.5 billion in industrial, commercial, and the institutional market. And certainly the last couple of years seen a little bit of a downward pressure, but we're still at pretty high levels. So yes, that's been different in different regions and different sectors over that time period, but certainly I don't think as a whole the construction industry has too much to complain about. We've had a pretty good run in terms of activity. However, we can't always rest on our laurels, and we can't say that past performance will lead to future performance. So annually, we team up with Ipsos Reid to do a survey of the contractor community. So we go out to 550 contractors in 5 regions of the province, from Northern Ontario, Southwestern Ontario, Central, GTA, and Eastern Ontario, to ask them their views about the construction industry. We're interviewing with unionized contractors as well as non-union contractors, general and trade contractors, getting their perceptions about what they're feeling. And we don't ask them to go out 3 years, 5 years, 10 years. We really sort of say, you know, what are you doing? What is your expectation for next year compared to where you are today? And we're talking to them in December. So when they're just starting to think, they're finishing up their year and they're starting to think about what's going to be happening in the year to come. This year we talked to contractors who were in the ICI sector, as well as those contractors who do work in the high-rise residential market, because we think there's a fair bit of crossover between contractors who might work in that high-rise sector who may also be working in the office sector. So what did they say? And where is that optimism that I saw when I was reading their survey? The first thing, the main question we asked them, do you expect to do more or less work in the coming year? 40% of the contractors told us they expect more opportunities in 2014 than they had in 2013. So that's a pretty strong commitment to seeing more work. Even better is only 10% of the contractors that we interviewed said they were going to be doing less work in 2014. So when you look at that 40% of contractors doing more, 50% who said, well, we're doing at least the same as we did last year. You've got 90% of that community saying, we've got more opportunities that we're looking forward to in 2014. The GTA is certainly leading that group. There's above expectations, leading all regions in terms of their optimism for 2014. The second area is their economic strength. So they're looking at Ontario's economy. We asked them, what do you think about the current economy, and what do you think about the economy looking forward a year? 69% of those contractors that we spoke to said they feel the economic conditions are good in their community. Again, GTA and Central Ontario were the strongest in terms of those perceptions. Northern Ontario, not quite as strong, maybe seeing some pullback in some projects that they anticipated, so they're not quite as confident in the economic situation up in Northern Ontario. And this is an increase from their previous year. So they're seeing a strengthening of the Ontario economy. As Derek pointed out, things are starting to stabilize and the economy is starting to improve. So the contractor community is seeing that as well. Third area of optimism that contractors spoke about is in their hiring outlook. So when we asked them, do they anticipate hiring more workers in 2014? 33% of them said, yes, we'll be bringing on new workers. And that's, 1 in 3, not maybe the strongest endorsement of hiring, and is down somewhat from last year. But I think the bigger notice is that only 9% of contractors expect that they will actually decrease their employment for 2014. And that is significantly lower than it has been in the past. So they're looking at a fairly stable year in 2014. Again, GTA, the strongest in their hiring intentions. I think it was about 40 to 50% of the contractors in the GTA said they'd be hiring this year. So one of the things we do with all this information we get from the contractors is we're able to put the information into a construction barometer. So to gauge the confidence of the contractors and to compare that number over a number of years. So each year we can look at that barometer and see how are things compared to last year. So our barometer is based on a scale of 0 to 100. At 50, that would mean the same number of contractors expect to increase work as those who decrease work, so a stable condition. So this year, the barometer clocked in at 64, up 4 points from last year and up from 2012. So we're seeing some strengthening in their expectations. So we view a 64 as positive. It's not a super bullish barometer, but it's certainly positive in that they are expecting more work than less. And of course, that varies depending on the sector they're in as well as the region. Just have a quick look at the regional barometers, and that might be a little bit hard to see. It's a bit small, but Ontario's the black diamond there, just around the 65, 64 mark. GTA you're seeing as much more bullish than the province. As I've mentioned, certainly contractors in the GTA have the most optimism for 2014. Eastern Ontario, right in at the provincial average. Certainly they're relatively optimistic, but the interesting story we found from Eastern Ontario is their barometer reading is actually up about 18 points from last year. Last year they were at the low end of the scale. They weren't quite as optimistic for their outlook in 2013, but certainly things have turned around for them and they're seeing much more optimism for 2014. And that was led predominantly by contractors who are in the Ottawa region. Northern Ontario, as I've mentioned, not as strong in their expectations for 2014. Still positive. They're still expecting growth to increase. They're just not as positive as some of the other regions. Central and Southwestern Ontario coming in at about the same as where they were last year and just modestly below the provincial average. So what were some of the challenges the contractors saw when they're looking forward to 2014? We asked a number of questions throughout the survey, and here are a few of the things they talked about. One thing the contractors observed in terms of their outlook, they're not expecting as many opportunities in the institutional sector. Only about 16% of contractors said they expected to do more work in that sector in the coming year. And certainly that's consistent with what our views would be, given government restraint. They're trying to manage their budgets, pulling back some of their activity in terms of spending in that institutional space. Certainly it's not a a certain crash. Those levels are at still really high levels, but contractors are seeing that maybe that's not the sector where they're going to be doing the most amount of work. The supply of labor. And this question's causing us some challenges, because every year we ask the question, what do you think? Do you have enough workers available to meet your demands, to meet your needs, to do the projects that you have on your books? And every year it comes in the pretty high 60s, 70% of contractors saying that they think shortages are a problem. They're reporting that there's somewhat of a shortage or a severe shortage of workers. So 73% is a good number of contractors saying that there's a problem out there. And so when we dive further into that to try to assess what is it that they're saying, we see that on the union side, it's slightly less. Only 64% of unionized contractors expect there to have some difficulty in meeting their demands. Non-union contractors, 76%. But again, those are still relatively high numbers. And I think in our next survey, we're going to try to dig in further to try to assess what it is. Are they talking to us at peak times? Certainly in construction, we all know there's peak times of year where you have to use mobility to bring workers in. Is that what they're talking about? Or is this a persistent day in, day out challenge that they're having? And we're not really seeing that. Of course, there's a regional element to it. Northern Ontario, their answer to this question, they're much more concerned about supply of labor. But in the north, you're dealing with different challenges. It's a large area, smaller population, and usually larger projects, and they do have to bring in workers from outside of the region to fill their demand. So certainly this is something we're looking at, and I think we'll dive in a little more next year to try to explore what are contractors actually meaning by this. We also looked at build force data to try to get a better handle on what they say about labor availability and potential shortages in the coming years. And actually, when you look at build force data, they've just recently come out with their survey. They're basically saying Ontario will be in a balanced situation in 2014, with the exception of Northern Ontario that will incur some difficulties in terms of finding labor. So again, there's a bit of a dichotomy between what we're hearing from the contractor community and what other data sources are telling us. Just generally with build force, they anticipate the need for about 95,000 additional workers over the course of their forecast scenario, so up to 2023. 58,000 of those workers they feel will come. Just as a rule, we've got our young apprentices here today, so bringing more people into the community. So they think they'll manage about half of that demand through just the normal course of things, but that will still leave us a gap of about 37,000 workers that we will need to either attract from other industries, other sectors of the economy, other provinces to be able to fill our demand. That leads into the whole issue of apprenticeship. We talked to the contractor community about their role in apprenticeship and continue to be encouraged that about half of the contractors who respond to our survey say that they participate in the apprenticeship program and the system and that they hire apprentices. As we've noticed in past years, the unionized sector clearly is the backbone of the apprenticeship system in Ontario. 82%, or 8 out of every 10 contractors of union contractors hire apprentices. On the non-union sector, you're only seeing about half of those non-union contractors who have an apprentice on staff. And certainly we need to continue to do that to be able to meet that demand. We still need that 58,000 people coming into our industry, plus more. So we certainly need to continue to encourage all contractors to take on apprentices and to support that system. We talked to the contractors to get a sense of what they think about the costs. So every year, of course, costs go up. Contractors say, yes, I expect costs to go up. This year, what's interesting, 80% of the contractors said that they expect costs to increase for materials and transportation. And that's quite a bit higher than they've said in the past. So we read into that it's much more pressing and urgent that they anticipate much more increase in their costs this year than they have in past year. 70% of the contractors say they see an increase in labor costs in the coming year. So now let's move to the opportunities. And they do see a lot of opportunities, and I've touched on some of those themes already. The key opportunity, and I think one of the main messages coming out of this year's survey, is the strength of the Greater Toronto Area. So certainly it is the leading area, and it will drive activity in Ontario in the construction industry this year. Some of the areas where the contractors see strength within the GTA, certainly the office market. We'll hear from Carl Gomez shortly about what's happening in that office market. Number of buildings currently under construction in Toronto, a bit of a revitalization of that office sector in Toronto. People moving, companies moving from the financial district south of the Gardiner to build new facilities, more modern facilities. And this picture here is a picture of 1 York Street, where Sun Life will be moving into as they're just starting their construction now. Metro links or transit infrastructure is another area that the GTA contractors talked about, and certainly we'll be hearing from Jack Collins later after our break to talk about some of the work that's going on in that sector. I've put the Darlington refurbishment up here as well. That's not happening until 2016. There's some pre-work going on right now, and a bit of site and facility work happening there as they're planning to build that huge refurbishment. It's a $10 billion project, but not getting underway until 2016. And just to give some of the flavor of what the contractors were saying, we get them to give us some quotes. So this is one of the quotes a GTA contractor, when they're asking, we say, you know, what sector do you expect to do more work in? He obviously answered, he says more work in the infrastructure and the transit sector, and he's saying, I see increases in my work. It's tied to this infrastructure plan that's going on in Toronto, moving people around by different modes, reducing gridlock, and having alternative transportation modes. The commercial sector is the other area, is a key area that we're seeing lots of opportunity. I know Derek had a slide saying maybe we've hit the peak, and we're kind of there too. We're not sure whether we're at the peak or we've got another year or two there. It is at very high levels right now, but there are still some opportunities. There's retail that we have been having. I think I talked about the retail sector last year in terms of some of the US companies moving into Ontario. That's still happening. It's a picture of Nordstrom that will be moving in, a new company that's just coming into the Ontario market. There's a lot of mixed use activity going on. So you have your office towers, but mixing that with some residential and some retail. That work we see as increasing. And here in Ottawa, there's Lansdowne Park. So not all this commercial activity is just a Toronto story, predominantly a Toronto story, but there's certainly opportunities in other regions as well. This contractor commented, he said, yeah, I see more work in the commercial sector. And interestingly, he's not actually doing work in the commercial sector, but is looking to migrating to that sector to take advantage of some of those opportunities that he sees. Third area we see opportunities is in the engineering sector. So certainly the government is still committed to funding projects. There's still the $35 billion that the provincial government is spending over the next 3 years. A lot of that money will be going into transit and infrastructure park projects, a lot of them in the GTA, but certainly Southwestern Ontario has some of that money, as well as Ottawa in terms of their LRT. So still opportunities within that market, whether it's transit, roads, water, wastewater, or power sector projects. And contractors recognizing that. I'm looking at the infrastructure, looking to work in the infrastructure market because we're really behind. We've certainly heard a lot of talk about the infrastructure deficit, so contractors recognizing that. And opportunities in power plants, water treatment facilities, LRTs, and subways. So in terms of our outlook for 2014, here, the line graph is showing the historical perspective of ICI investment, commercial, the red line on the top, institutional in the middle, and industrial on the bottom. So yes, industrial has been low over the past several years, but we're seeing some modest growth in that sector, and we continue to expect that. Derek talked about the lower Canadian dollar and the benefit that will have to that manufacturing sector, and that in turn translates into industrial construction. So we're seeing an uptick in industrial construction for the coming year. Institutional investment down fairly steeply in 2013. It went down about 18% from the previous year. We see a continued decline in that, certainly not another 18%, probably in the 5% range drop in institutional investment. But again, what's important to notice here is that we're still at really high levels. So we're not saying there won't be any institutional activity over the next year, year and a half. It's just going to be at a lower level than it has historically been over the last 5 or so years. Commercial, we still see a little strength, especially based on what's happening in Toronto. So we would see a modest uptick in commercial investment in 2014. So some of the key takeaways that I think you can take from this, and certainly you have the survey in your package that you can read through at your leisure. We see increasing confidence. Our barometer is up, so we're seeing contractors as optimistic, quietly optimistic, not going out there and saying, wow, we're going to have a great year, but quietly optimistic about their fortunes for 2014. GTA certainly is expected to lead growth. Commercial sector showing the greatest potential in 2014. Labor supply does remain a concern, but overall we're going to see ICI investment up modestly in 2014. And I'm happy to invite Sean back up to facilitate any questions that we may have.
Thank you, Catherine. Thanks a lot, Catherine. Great presentation. Really appreciated the slides with the big fonts. Seriously. Okay, we have any questions for Catherine? Any questions from the floor? Just a reminder that Rishi and Stu are going through if you have any written questions. There was one question earlier that I didn't get to, but I think it's appropriate for you, Catherine, and that is with respect to the regions and the diversification in terms of construction activity. So you said in your presentation GTA is leading. Mm-hmm. Are there any other regions in the province where they have good construction opportunities going forward?
Well, certainly, and we're looking at 1 year. So Eastern Ontario certainly is showing some strength. They've got their LRT, Lansdowne Live, so they've got, and there's a number of institutional work actually going on in Eastern Ontario with government buildings. So that is one area. Northern Ontario has opportunities. I'm not sure whether those will be realized in 2014 or not. There may be more long-term opportunities. But certainly, you know, the way we see it, it's a GTA story right now. Other areas will be increasing, but not to the same extent.
And you've done this survey now with Ipsos. We've done this survey with Ipsos for
6 years.
6 years. 6 years. So in any one of those years, has there been any other region other than the GTA that's been leading for construction growth?
Yeah, I think last year, if I'm not mistaken, the North was.
Okay.
They were very optimistic. There was a lot of talk about mining opportunities in the North. Some of that has cooled down a little bit, but last year I believe Northern Ontario was the lead in terms of their optimism.
Okay, great. Lots of questions. Thanks so much. I'm not sure I'm going to be able to get to all of them. I have one other question here, I think, that with the high number of contractors identifying a shortage of workers, do you have any thoughts on what MTCU, federal government, is doing to increase the number of training seats available in the provinces? There appears to be more interest in apprenticeship and training opportunities.
Well, I know there's certainly, the government does talk about improving the apprenticeship system. They've got a variety of funding mechanisms that are available, tax credits to apprentices for completions, and that's really one of the stories that we've been driving at the OCS. Is it's, you know, there's one, you can bring in a lot of apprentices, but you really need to complete those apprentices to get them out to work. And that's what we're pushing. So the government has recognized that now, and they have completion credits for that. And trying to do some work around ensuring that when an apprentice gets into the system, that they can get out at the other end to complete. And we're doing some research on that as well, trying to track an apprentice as they go through their apprenticeship program to see what some of those barriers might be to getting them to complete.
Well, I can add to that. In terms of policy, our latest research project on apprenticeship, which was a overview of the apprenticeship system in Ontario related to construction, identified, and this is knowledge from MTCU and their data, that only 50% of all construction apprentices complete in the province of Ontario. And so that completion rate's pretty low. The unionized industry, on the trades that we studied, the completion rate's around 75%. And so that makes sense because of the investment we make into apprenticeship training. But the question is, how can we get more apprentices in the industry to complete? And so one of the things that we've been working on with Infrastructure Ontario is a policy where they will, for some of their upcoming projects, maximize the use of apprentices in IO projects. So that's in the works. We're looking at enrolling a pilot project in the next few months. And they've also indicated that in their RFP for the Eglinton Crosstown. I know OPG, there's a couple of representatives here from OPG, although the question asked about federal and provincial government. OPG for the refurb at Darlington is requiring contractors to have a prescribed number of apprentices on their job by term. So I don't know exactly what the numbers are, but definitely a prescribed number of apprentices need to be on those jobs. And also recent discussions with the federal government and the Ministry of Infrastructure there. They're looking as they roll out their Build Canada Fund to see if they can learn from some of these other best practices, OPG, Infrastructure Ontario, some of the research we've done to mandate maximizing the use of apprentices on these jobs. So, you know, the beauty of these government jobs is they're large. They usually last more than 2 to 3 years, and so the apprentice has an opportunity to get some hours in, because the number one reason apprentices don't complete is lack of work. So there's lots of work that the government can do in terms of their procurement practices over and above their funding for training seats and so on, but through the procurement practices to encourage the completion of apprentices. So that's some few positive steps forward in that way. Okay, we have lots of questions here, and we're not going to be able to get to them all. So what I'm going to propose is that, you know, keeping in the spirit of we're on Twitter now and the internet and all that stuff, when we send out the report, we'll send out a copy of all these questions and a Q&A to all these questions, so the whole audience will have the benefit of hearing the questions and seeing what our responses are. Okay? I'd like to ask Ron Martin to come up from the OCS board and Executive Director of the Construction Employers Coordinating Council of Ontario, CECO, to thank Katherine.
Katherine, I think the fact that we can't get through all the questions is a testament to how good that was today. That was excellent. Your knowledge on this stuff is appreciated. The presentation today was excellent, and on behalf of this group and the Ontario Construction Secretariat, I'd like to say thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Katherine. Okay, we do surveys for this conference every year, and one of the things that we received last year in terms of feedback is that people like more opportunity for networking during the break. So we're going to take a 25-minute break, and we'll reconvene at 10:30. We'll see you then.